Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the September 4th Foxborough Board of Selectmen meeting. I'll go over the agenda briefly. At 7 o'clock, we have citizens' input. At 7:05, we have the Selectmen Chairman's update. We have two public hearings. The first one is at 7:15, an application for the new officer director for the 99 Restaurant. At 7:30, an application for new officer and director at the Red Robin at Patriots Place. At 7:45, we have the update on the fire department overtime project that we've been working on for a few months. At 8:30, Selectman Walsh is going to give us an update on the negotiations with the craft organization and the town committee. At 9 o'clock, there's going to be a brief continuation of the discussion on the North Street parking, which is a layover from the last meeting that we had. And at 9:30, we are going into executive session for union negotiations and review of executive session minutes. And I do not believe we'll be returning to open session after that. So if Jenny, you want to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. So we have somebody for citizens' input, and if you could just introduce yourself briefly for the record.
Yeah, Bob Siteman, 30 Taylor Road. I'm here tonight representing the Veteran Services Advisory Committee and the Veteran Services Department. I apologize, we're late in submitting our application for the use of the town common for this year's second annual POW MIA National Remembrance Day, to be held the 22nd of September at 4:45 p.m. It'll be a little bit pared back from last year, as we won't be having the 24-hour vigil. It'll just be the ceremony. Similar to last year, we'll have Rolling Thunder do a ride around the common again. Short ceremony with some guest speaker, some POW MIA families that are going to be there. We'll have an introduction and narration of the Missing Man Table, again, which is the representation of the POWs and the remembrance of them. We will also have a presentation of the new flag again from Rolling Thunder, which we'd ask one of the Board of Selectmen to accept from Rolling Thunder, and we'll take the old flag down and hang the new POW MIA flag at the Vietnam Memorial again, as we did last year. And so tonight I'm just here to submit the application, which Kevin has already seen and approved officially, and to ask the Board of Selectmen to attend, and also other town officials and the general public. And again, I'd also just like to thank the board for their continued support for veterans and veterans activities within the town.
Great.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, thank you, Bob.
I'll submit a copy of this to Sandra, and so hopefully we'll see everyone at the event on the 22nd at 4:45.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you get that, Frank?
I'm going to ask Bob.
Thank
you.
I'll get everything to the...
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that group did an amazing job last year,
Yeah.
and it was very memorable. And actually, that's a good segue a little bit into, if people do want to use the common, we do have a new form and a new process, not too much different from before, but thank you for bringing that publicly. So, and I guess if one or all of the selectmen want to attend on the 22nd, we're invited.
An invitation for all of the selectmen. Yes.
Thank you.
We would ask that you select one person to accept the flag.
Very good. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else from citizens' input? All right, seeing nobody. A couple quick updates under Chairman's update. Not so much of an update, but I did want to extend a thank you to the Foxborough JCs and to Foxborough Cable Access. Every year, this is the second decade that they've been doing the free free concerts on the Common, and I think they were pretty well attended. And again, free means free. People came and with their families. So a lot of volunteers, but also a lot of corporate sponsors for each event. And they listed some on their website: Bay Colony, Douglas King Builders, Foxborough Federal Savings Bank, Mayfair Realty, on-tip gloves, Rodman Ford, and the learning experience in Foxborough. And I know each year there's a reach out for donations, and it can't be done without that. So thank you to the Foxborough JCs and the Cable Access for doing that again this year. A shout out to the best wishes to the school committee and the school department. The first day of school was today, and I think it went off pretty successful. They invited the Board of Selectmen last week on Monday to tour the high school and the renovations that they did there. And it was nice to see the creativity in some of the improvements. They stretched the dollars, I think, as far as it could go with some of the improvements that they did there. And it was a nice tour, and thank you for the invite. Quick thoughts to the Knight family. Many of you had seen in town that Christopher Knight was hit by a car on Baker Street. He's 13 years old. Tough time for the family. And I know that there was a lot of community support, which is nice to see Foxborough do. And if you can continue to reach out, I'm sure they appreciate that. Invencis had an open house. Many of the people attended last week. Board of Selectmen was invited. There's an open comment period till October 15th, I believe. And what that is, they did their final draft of what they call a C1 RAO, which was some contaminants that were discharged into the Neponset Reservoir, and they've gone forward and started going to start their 5-year extended period of more study and testing on that. So the public's invited to review those reports, and again, they have until October 15th to report back to the DEP any questions or concerns. The NRCC, which is the Neponset committee that is set up, had asked to come in front of the Selectmen, similar to what they did last year, to help get the word out and help public comment. So we're going to invite them, I believe, next week, if we can put them on the agenda, for them to come in and kind of give us an update on some of the work that they're doing out there as well. Some of the upcoming items that we have penciled on the agenda. We are starting to look at the town hall repairs, and Bill Caspera and their consultant's going to be presenting some of the, I think, the quick fixes that need to be done immediately on town hall to move in the direction of making it a little bit more livable. Linda Walsh and Mike Johns, I think, pencil for next week to come in and update us on the veterans' pay.
Yep. That
That was a layover from the last town meeting where it didn't pass, but that we were going to look at redoing it, so it was a little more palatable. So that's coming up hopefully next week. Some healthcare changes on the, because of the new state regulations. We're going to be getting an update on the pavement management system as a follow-up to our last session with them. And then in October, we're going to start the fiscal year 14 budgeting. The goals, have a joint meeting with the school committee and start to discuss the closing date and the special town meeting scheduled dates. So that's all coming up. Lastly, this weekend coming up is the McGinty Family Fun Day. If you remember, I know they had it last year. Was that the
Common.
but they've been having it every year, correct?
Yes. Well, they skipped 1 year.
They skipped 1 year. So it's Saturday from 11:30 to 3:30. They're going to have a couple local bands, 36 Red, Odyssey and the Brass Band. Odyssey and the Brass Daddies are going to be playing. There's a lot of stuff for the kids, and then the money that they receive is going to be going back into a scholarship, so it's kind of give and take at the same time. And it's really to honor all those that died in 9/11, which is coming up again. So if you can make it, it's a fantastic day. A little long-winded, but that's the update. And be a few minutes before the 7:15 public hearing, so
Action.
anything the board wants to add to that? Anything to add on the open sessions you've been having? For the people walking in?
Well, there was no one today.
Nobody today, minimal?
But I don't know whether people realize that we're still doing it the first Tuesday of the month. Morning session from 10 to noon, and then evening session 5, is it 5?
To 6:30.
5 to 6:30. And it's office hours. Anyone can come to voice their opinion, ask questions, or just have their thoughts known.
And thank you for doing that. Between all the joint meetings we're having with the planning board and water and sewer and the committee, the hours that you guys spent on that, thank you. Appreciate that. Let's go through a couple action items. We have meeting minutes from August 7th. Any comments on the August 7th meeting minutes?
Move that we accept the minutes from August 7th.
Second?
Motion made, seconded. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
I have to abstain. I wasn't here. Right?
Okay. Don't,
Yep.
yeah. So 4, 0, and 1 abstaining from Ginny. We have a request to accept a donation of $500 to the Recreation Gift Fund from ING for the volunteer hours. A memo from Deb Giordino.
Move to accept with gratitude.
Motion to
Second.
accept, seconded. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
It's 5-0, thank you. We have an application from D. Myers, from J. Pullip Distributors for two one-day beer and wine license for the J. Pullip Distributors Trade Show to be held at Christina's on September 18th. And there's an application and a flyer that accompanied that.
I move that we approve the 2 licenses for September 17th and the 18th for the trade show to be held at Christina's.
Second?
Motion made, seconded. I think these both say September 17th.
Right.
17th and 18th.
17th. Well, they have to have it.
There's one,
They have 2 divisions. We're missing
yeah,
one.
on this.
It expires on the 18th, but they're both for there's 2 for the 17th? I think what they wanted was 1 for the 17th, 1 for the 18th.
They do.
Yeah.
So we can
can
make
just-
a modification to that
You
application.
can just scratch, on the originals, just scratch 7 on 1, put 8.
Put it in the
and
initial it,
No
okay.
problem.
All right, motion made, seconded. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
5-0. We have an application for a one-day beer and wine license for a music festival to be held at the Orpheum on September 8th, and that's from Bill Cunningham at the Big Colony Orpheum Theater.
By the way, Mr. Chairman, just want to let the board know that the police chief reviewed all these 1 days and fine with all of them. No problems in the past.
So moved.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
5-0. Might as well go through all these quick. We've got an application for 2 one-day beer and wine license for a motorcycle run to benefit children with special needs to be held on September 30th, with rain dates on the 14th or the 28th at 105 Washington Street, and that's from the Bridge Center by Paul Waits.
So moved.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. Discussion?
Just, again, I know that there's sometimes a problem with the Lafayette House seems to have a problem with that, so I just want to make sure that everybody's safe up there in that area.
Yep. And I think it was when they have functions like a christening or a quiet event and the motorcycles are revving and
Right.
taking off.
Yeah.
And I think a few years ago, we asked if they could kind of get together to talk about it, or at least to inform Lafayette.
Yeah.
So-
But the chief okayed it, so.
Motion was made? Seconded?
Second?
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
The motion carries 5-0. And a request permission to hold a neighborhood block party and block off traffic from Glenwood Ave to, at Baker Street to 50 Railroad Ave on Wednesday, September 5th. Wednesday?
That's what I said.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, from 1 PM to 10 PM. It's a little out of the ordinary, and the only question I had, because I know it's okay, but what about school buses? I mean,
I don't know that they go down Railroad Ave.
I
I
don't know.
think that they get
Must not.
dropped at,
I know the police chief and
Yeah.
Roger, the fire chief, have both approved it, so
right.
Okay.
I'm assuming they dealt with that.
They said all residents are aware of the event. That's coming from,
They'll probably just walk the kids down the end of the street.
yeah.
Hopefully it works out. Okay,
How long? distance.
Since you're here, Chief, do you know anything about that? It's kind of an odd time, 1 to 10, in the middle of the week.
Yeah, I actually talked to the gentleman. I don't know why they picked that date, but we made it very clear that we still need to have emergency vehicles be able to gain access into that area. They said that we would. And so after talking to Chief O'Leary, we both felt it was going to be okay.
Okay, the motion?
I move that we approve the
Thank you.
neighborhood block party to block off from Glenwood Ave to Baker Street
Second.
at 50 Railroad Ave, Wednesday, September 5th, from 1 to 10 p.m.
All right, motion made, seconded by Mark. Any more discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. And last action item was a request to name the new road to be located off Oak Street, that's the intersection of Oak and Cohasset, as Lincoln Hill Way. And that's from Michael Ferrone from Briarwood Construction Corp. And in the packet, there's a letter requesting it, and a little bit of history of Lincoln Hill in a map, subdivision map.
And this has been run by the Historical Society, and Jack Othelette said it's appropriate. And I believe that Public Safety said that the road name was fine. So I move that we accept the new road to be called Lincoln Hill Way.
Second.
Now, are you asking that if it was
No,
run
it
through
was.
Jack? It was, okay.
It was,
All right.
yes.
Okay, motion made, seconded. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. That was an interesting little bit of history on Lincoln Hill.
Yes.
Okay, being 3:17, is there anyone here
Mr.
for the public hearing?
The applicants have requested an extension of time, and we were able to get that into the paper today in sufficient time so they can do it at the next meeting.
Do we need to open the meeting?
I'm sorry?
Do we need to open the public meeting and continue it?
Yes, you do, thank
So
you.
read the legal
Okay.
notice?
Yep.
The Board of Selectmen of the Town of Foxborough, acting as the local licensing authority pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 138, will conduct a public hearing on Tuesday, September 4th, 2012, at 7:15 p.m. in the Andrew A. Gallo Jr. Meeting Room, 40 South Street, Foxborough, Massachusetts, on an application for new officer, director, issuance of stock, transfer of stock, and new stockholder of an annual all-alcoholic beverages restaurant license from 99 Restaurant of Boston, LLC, 4 Fisher Street, Foxborough, Massachusetts. All interested persons are invited to attend the hearing.
Okay, so the
I move to...
hearing's been opened.
Move to
and-
continue.
Second.
To what date?
The 18th, is it?
Yes.
Kevin?
The 18th.
So motion made to extend, to continue it till September 18th and seconded. Further discussion? At the request of the applicant. All those in favor?
Aye.
5-0. Okay. Now, Kevin, the next application for a new director at Red Robin, I didn't see anything in the packet for legal notices. Is that?
It's not a public hearing.
Okay.
You can, if the applicant is here, you're not required, to go according to the exact
Okay.
times in your agenda. Those are just planning time, so you're fine.
Okay. Is there anyone here from Red Robin? Okay, excellent.
You can come up.
Yeah, if you wanted to come sit at the table and you want to introduce yourself, and we are being recorded on camera as well.
Can you just move that mic closer to you? Yeah, there you go.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Andrew Upton, representing Red Robin.
Okay, and I think we have the application in our packet. So do you want to explain or introduce what you're applying for?
Sure. We are applying for a change of officer. Red Robin's corporate headquarters is in a suburb outside Denver, Colorado, and we will replace Christina Carlson, who is the current treasurer of the nationwide organization, with Mr. Stuart Brown. So it will have no impact on the restaurant, on the menu, on the floor plan, on the management, or on any of the restaurants in Massachusetts. It's just an ABCC requirement that we do it this way.
Okay. So from a day-to-day, the management and the people staffing are not changing, and this is more paperwork from outside of the state on corporate?
Exactly right.
Okay. I won't go around the table, but is there any comments or questions? And I think this is what
Just
happened at
general.
Christina's, that they didn't follow through on the
That's right.
corporate
Just
stuff.
Exactly what you
general
want to do.
housekeeping, and they are doing the housekeeping, so.
Yep.
Motion to approve the application for the new officer director at Red Robin Restaurant.
Motion made, seconded.
Second.
Second by Mark. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
Nice seeing you again.
Nice to see you.
This is like laser fast, James.
it. You set to go
It's
fast.
okay by me.
Let me
Like
see.
Going too
Yeah.
fast. No, we can do town manager, fire chief's here, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, we can do the overtime.
Yeah,
ready
let's,
to roll on that.
Chief, you want to come to the table? In the packet this week, there was a lengthy, some documentation, mostly in response to the last meeting that we had. The board had asked some specific questions to go back and look at. We also invited the advisory committee through email if anyone wanted to come, and I think they got the same. Did you get the same information? I think you emailed out.
Sorry?
Yeah, okay. So, and I'll let you make the presentation, but just as a background, the question of the overtime every year being in addition to the regular hours posed the question, do we hire more staff and cut down the overtime, or keep the overtime? And if we're going to keep the overtime, let's look at the overtime and see how it compares to the other towns. Is it being abused? Is it in sync with our population and the needs of the town? So that was probably a month and a half or so ago.
Yep.
And you came back, and I know you worked with Kevin and Randy on getting the data. So that's just as a background, so if you wanted to introduce what you came back with today.
Well, good evening to all of you, and again, thank you for the opportunity to come back and answer those questions. I think that if you look in your package, you're going to see that pretty much the questions you asked, we were able to get some very detailed information and a lot of facts to support or answer the questions that you guys had posed to us. I still think that, and Kevin, I'm going to probably bounce this back to you, but I still think that the question that comes to mind is that we have a variety of different directions that we can go as a community. But I think that the key and the number one thing that we have to look at is the measurement that we make a determination on what exactly is appropriate staffing for the protection of this community. And that goes everywhere. For the last 2 years, I've been presenting my case to the AdCom and to the Board of Selectmen and to the town manager of our staffing levels being at 8 to a bare minimum of 6. And that's where all of those discussions, I think, have been stemmed. And in every case, I think we've laid out the reasons and the rational process that we use to show what we do for workload and how we protect our community. The first chart that I have, and do you want to go through your memo, Kevin, or?
Yeah, it might be helpful. I mean, talk about what the two questions were. I thought it was interesting comparing it to the different towns, the population, their
Right.
staffing, their overtime budgets, and what happens when you take the cities out of the mix.
Right.
And then I also want to go back to some of the recommendations that Kevin made from a previous meeting, and maybe the board can take some action on that at the end.
So, the board had asked a series of questions, 4 specifically at your last meeting. First, how do we look compared to other communities in terms of our staffing? So, Roger had undertook a survey. You've got the spreadsheet on the back. It's basically all the Norfolk County communities. So it gives us a pretty good read. Average staff per community is 45 compared with Foxborough's 28, but in there is Weymouth and Quincy. When you take them out, the average is 33 compared to 28, so we're pretty comparable. The average staff per capita, which is much more important, how many firefighter EMTs do we have per person? It's 595 for Norfolk County, and with our 28, we have one for every 607 residents. So again, nothing remarkable there. We're pretty much where everybody else is. The overtime actual spent column. Now, we didn't look at budgeted because frankly, budgeted doesn't mean a thing. Town's budget amount and then spend more or less. So we looked at the actual expenditures. Average overtime expense per community was $501,000 with our overtime at $447,000. Now, overtime expenses are pretty comparable, whatever they are. They're not really affected by staffing levels and that sort of thing, unless you're really drastically understaffing and you have a minimum staffing level, which skews it tremendously. But we didn't counter that. Now, one way to standardize overtime is to look at how much overtime a community spends per capita for every citizen. So for the communities in the study, it was $20.16 per capita, while we were at $26.29. That's a pretty significant variation. But again, when you take out the two cities, Weymouth and Quincy, because they would tend to spend more, being cities, the average overtime per capita is $23.60, and with Foxborough at $26.29, we're much closer to the average, and again, nothing really significant there. Second question you asked, what's the cost of staffing the Foxborough Fire Department at 8 firefighters, EMTs per shift? So we did a chart for you, and what we found is that it's an average cost of $54,926.14 per firefighter per year. So 4 firefighters would cost us $419,000. Now, lest anyone think that's all straight salary, it isn't. So here's the components. $54,000 is the current salary. That's top step. Education stipend for bachelor's degree, $1,373. So the salary and the stipend together is $56,000. That's the money benefits that we have to pay out for that firefighter. There's $29,839 in benefits. Now that's health insurance, retirement, OPEB, all that rolled in. And we've got a very good formula that Randy's put together that really goes through that in detail if anybody wants it. Now each firefighter EMT comes with a certain amount of sick leave, bereavement leave, personal leave, et cetera. And we can track all that now because we've got very, very specific numbers that allows us to tell you for one day of sick leave, how much statistically, on average, of that sick leave is going to end up being taken annually, and secondly, how much of that will be overtime. So we now have this formula built where we can track that very, very precisely. So what we did is we ran out the cost of sick leave, personal leave, holiday leave, training, and vacation, and you can see those numbers there. So in other words, the theory is a firefighter EMT comes with leave time, some of which, when he or she takes it, is going to result in overtime to fill their shift. So the total cost is $104,000. Now, the actual experience, because these leave numbers can vary, what I will tell you is that it may be 104, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. These are averages, computed over the course of the last 3 fiscal years. So here's what we can say with certainty. 56 and 29, or 85,000, is the hardcore cost. That's the actual salary plus benefits that we pay, 85. The difference between 104 and 85, or about 19,000, is the potential cost in overtime that this extra person would cause us. Okay? So that's basically how it breaks down. Your third question, what is the overtime savings which might be achieved for each new firefighter EMT we would hire? Well, there isn't any savings, and this is the reason why. With a 7 firefighter EMT budgeted staff, which is what we run, and a 6 firefighter EMT minimum staffing, remember that the first firefighter EMT who's off the staff for any reason, sick leave, bereavement, vacation, we don't fill back, so there's no overtime impact. The second firefighter EMT who's off a shift causes an immediate overtime event, okay? So, if it were possible, theoretically, to take the one new firefighter EMT and make sure that they were on shifts only where overtime would have otherwise occurred, in other words, they were on a shift when that second vacancy occurs, then you could presume that 100% of their salary cost would be saved in overtime. Point of fact, that's not going to happen, because on any given shift, you may have 3 vacancies, you may have 1 vacancy, you may have no vacancies. And you can't move a firefighter EMT around. Number one, common sense tells you can't do that. You can't say, hey, come into work now, come into work maybe Tuesday at 3. You have to assign them to a shift. That's a contract in any event. And so we would be guessing at how much overtime would be saved. However, here's what we can say. If 100% of the firefighter's salary at that firefighter will work 2,190 hours at an overtime rate of $37.58. If every one of those 2,190 hours that firefighter worked resulted in an overtime savings, that would be $82,300 we'd save. So if you compare $82,300, the savings, to $104,987, the cost, it's actually a negative number. So each new firefighter EMT actually costs us money, and that's assuming that 100% of their time saved overtime, which it will not. So the actual variation between how much time they save us and how much money we pay them is always going to be a negative number. Now, in computing the negative number of $22,686, we've used averages, okay? We can't tell you exactly if it would be 22 or 15 or 35. What we can tell you is, based on the experience of the 3 years of statistical data gathering that we did, that the average amount of time that each individual firefighter EMT is off, combined with the amount of times that causes overtime, we can say that it is not going to save money. And I think you can see, even if we assume 100% savings, we still don't save money. It's a common fallacy that if you hire new full-time personnel, then you'll save money on overtime. It's a common fallacy. The only way that might work, theoretically, is if you had an 8 or 9 firefighter EMT staff, you had a much lower incidence of overtime caused by vacancies. And then if you noticed that you had a lot of overtime on one shift or one time of year or some pattern, then you could take the new firefighter EMT, put him or her there, and maybe get a better return on value. But it completely does not apply in our case. So we can tell you that that new firefighter EMT is not going to save us money. We can say that with absolute certainty. Last question you asked, I'm sorry, 4th question out of 5. In the area of mutual aid, does the town send resources to other communities more often than it received those resources? Chief did a 3-year comparison, and it's split between medical and fire. And basically what you see is that for the 3-year total, we sent, on the fire side, 174 times fire assets, but received 486 fire assets. Pretty good deal there. In the area of medical, we sent 280 assets on 280 different times, received 266, so pretty break even. So the answer to the question is, we're probably making out at a rate of almost 2 to 1 in the area of mutual aid. I don't know exactly what the reasons for that are, but certainly we're not losing money. Our taxpayers aren't supporting another community. Now, I'll tell you, we have found in other studies in other towns where I've done this, we have found, most famously years ago, Brockton severely reduced its staffing one year, and all the communities in the area basically became the backup fire department for the city of Brockton. We did that for about 6 months. We started noticing we were sending a lot more than receiving, And we called the chief in and the city council and the mayor and said, look, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to suspend our mutual aid agreement, except for severe multiple alarm fires. And that caused the city council to appropriate money, make up for that, and the problem went away overnight. But in our case, there is no problem. Last question you asked, does the practice of firefighter EMT shift swapping cost the town money in overtime? Now, this is a practice where a firefighter can have another firefighter take his or her shift, just a swap out. In the contract, there's plain language that says that this cannot cause overtime. The reality is it probably does. Now, how often? We can't say, because it's certainly possible that the person who swaps at a later date ends up being out because they change their mind at a later date. We know that's a rare event. Now, we haven't tracked it. We don't know statistically.
We haven't tracked it, but that would be a
Very, very
a big
rare.
red flag for everybody, and we have not seen it.
I mean, frankly, if two firefighters swapped out, and then the second firefighter working later were to call in sick, bereavement leave, whatever, that would be a laser. We would be all over that saying, whoa, wait a minute, you're not going to do that anymore. So everybody understands it's a privilege, and it's a wonderful privilege, and it's a very helpful privilege, but it's not one that can be abused. And the minute it gets abused, that's going to get negotiated out of the contract. Plus it says, shall not cause an overtime event. So I won't tell you that it doesn't ever cause overtime. I will tell you it's extremely rare, and we know that for a fact. So those are the answers to your question, and hopefully that brings us back to where you can look at the final exhibit in the report, the recommendation section. Raj?
Yeah, there's just two things I wanted to bring back to everybody's attention. Again, if you remember, we had given you a report showing you our 3-year averages. This is at the last time. And at that point, our 3-year average of where we've been budgeted versus what we've been using was about $86,000 that we overspend in the overtime area. But again, to make sure everybody is aware of that, we do not have a budget line for IOD, for when people get hurt on job. We do not have any overtime line for military, administrative leave, and bereavement leave. So there's 4 major categories that we don't budget for. And if you look at this analysis that we did with the surrounding communities, and you look at Foxborough alone, we budget $355,303. And our expenditures were $447,085. It falls right in suit with what the 3-year analysis said, and it also pretty much averages out with the communities that are very clearly identical to Foxborough. So I hope that that folks can see that we have been doing a really good job being very frugal. And even with our numbers, our factual statistical numbers, it fits into the model of what's going on out there in the other communities. So it's important that we all know that.
So I think what we can say to the board with a fair degree of assurance is that, A, there is not an out-of-the-park home run silver bullet we can give you and say, do this, and we'll reduce overtime spending dramatically. We can say that our overtime spending is pretty consistent with other communities. We're not above the norm. We can say that our staffing levels are fairly consistent with other communities on a per capita basis. And we can tell you that we do have some things that make us a little unusual. That, of course, is the stadium, although how it impacts this is not clear, but we do know that no other community other than Mansfield has a facility like that. So, bottom line is, of the $85,000 that we, on average, under budget for overtime, I can tell you that we can save some of that. If we do some of these things in the recommendation section, you endorse those things, then we can save some. What do I think? Maybe 10 or 20,000, something like in that range. I think the savings in the area of sick leave. I think the savings in a couple of areas where we've spent more than we budgeted for certain, what do I call them, Raj, discretionary overtime expenses like training. In reality, what this says is we shouldn't do that. We should establish a budget. That should be something we collectively discuss and debate. And, you know, once it's set up, it's set up. Raj doesn't go over that unless he has a surplus somewhere else, and then he can put it toward training. So there's some money we can save in there, But what I'm going to tell you is, the reality is, we are in fact under budgeting for overtime. If you accept, and it's the number one thing on the recommendation that I'm asking the board, if you accept the 6 firefighter EMT minimum shift, then 80 to 85% of what we're spending on OT is caused by that 6-person shift. And it's not going to change unless you change that staffing level. And as you know, the chief and I do not recommend that you change the staffing level. I'm not going to tell you I have his expertise. He recommends the 6. Does that mean that there are surplus personnel at times? Of course. That's the nature of the fire service and EMT service. What towns accept that private EMT services don't is more downtime. Private EMT services tend to regionalize their service. They accept less downtime. Their crews are more active, but they have much, much longer response times. Why? Because when that regional crew is out on a call and a second one comes in, first of all, they're covering a bigger area. Secondly, when the call comes in for a second ambulance, they're a lot longer away. So they accept longer response times. Communities that operate their own EMT services generally have made the quality of life decision that we want fast response. And believe me, in Foxborough, you get fast response. Whether it's the first call or the second call, you get fast response. You can pretty well count that anywhere in this community on a normal day or night, your 3 to 4 minute response time is the norm for an EMT paramedic crew to be on scene. Second call might be 4 to 5 minutes, a little bit longer because, it just takes a little bit longer to gather the personnel necessary and get out there. But that is an incredible response time. It is the standard adopted by the American Heart Association for those kinds of heart attacks where electricity, a defibrillator, can be efficacious. Now, of all the calls that occur in the course of a year, there are very, very few where electricity is going to save someone's life. But here's the question. Does anybody want to roll the dice and say, we're going to have a lower minimum staffing because that first 2 ambulance is going to get there. The second one is not going to make that 3 to 5 minute window. They're not. So, will the accident occur? Well, you've all seen the headlines that were up in Haverhill. I think it was a fire, Roger, correct me, not an EMT call, not an EMS call. But what happens is you can roll the dice and you can save a lot of money and you can go along for weeks, months, years, and nothing happens. But the first time you have that dual call and someone dies because we couldn't make that 3 to 5 response time, you can be absolutely sure you're going to hear about it. They publicly said that the mayor who cut the budget in Haverhill was a murderer, unquote, because he had cut the budget and because the response time was extended on a multiple call situation that he caused the death. Well, of course, that's ridiculous, and it was later retracted. But it's the kind of emotional stuff that occurs when you make that decision. So it ends up being a communal decision. Do we pay a lot of money that is for people, for firefighter EMTs to be idle while we're waiting for those calls to happen? Yes. But that's a standard we accept because we want the service, because none of us wants it to be our husband, our wife, our child, our grandmother, our grandfather. So we pay the dough. Is it a good investment? You're the policymakers. We're just here to give you the news.
Before we go around the board, and thank you, by the way, is there anyone from AdCom that wanted to add, or AdCom, or some people call it the Finance Committee, had a liaison, so I invited them to see if anybody, because they worked a little closer around budget time. Larry, you don't have to. I didn't want to invite you and not give you the opportunity.
All I was going to say is I think, at our meeting, we'll look at your model, we'll get into a lot of details. People on our committee who are a lot smarter than I am about this stuff, and, we'll spend a lot of time on it. For myself, I just can't get my head around the arithmetic of it, that if you hired 4 more people, 1 person for each shift, how that doesn't eliminate a big chunk of the overtime, because you're always going to have at least 1 extra person on every shift. So by definition, you have to be, you're always going to have somebody there.
Think about it this way,
Yeah.
because it's pretty simple. The cost of those 4 firefighters is
About
$400,000 roughly.
Yeah.
Our entire overtime budget is $355.
Mhm.
So in order for those 4 firefighters, each put on 1 shift,
Right.
to save to save $355,000, in order to make it cost efficient, they would have to eliminate the overtime budget. Never going to happen.
Mhm.
Now, you can either think of it logically that way, as just sort of, macro thinking, if you will, or you can plod through the numbers we've prepared and see where we can't say exactly, Larry, but what we can say with absolute certainty is that you're not going to save a lot if you save anything at all.
Yeah, and that's just my point, is there's a...
So if you look at 4 more, don't look at it for overtime savings. Look at it because maybe the town needs 4 more to provide
Well,
coverage.
that's another point.
And that's not what this study was
might-
about.
You might incrementally add a small cost, but you might then dramatically get better service. I don't know.
And that's
That's the balance that you
And
have to
that's a
strike.
different question. I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to make the additional point to the board. This is not a staffing study. A staffing study is a very different effort than this. Raj, Randy, and I all worked hard on this thing. Tyler worked fantastically, our intern. Would be happy to look at staffing if you guys want to go there. But I think realistically, this amount of work was so laborious, took so much time. I think I'd tell you, really, you want to do staffing, let's get a chunk of money, let's hire a consultant, do a staffing study. Let's not try to task us, because we just don't have time to replicate all
Yeah,
this.
I think in the next couple of weeks, we'll take an evening and we'll just really get into the numbers, because you have a lot of data, which is great. And with a whole bunch of eyes looking at it, I think we'll understand it a lot better than...
And if you find a mistake, and you might, it's probably
It's
Roger's
not
fault.
yours? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Anyone from the board? I won't go around, but if, sure.
Just a couple of thoughts. Emergency rooms have busy nights and not so busy nights, and you can typically guess what they're going to be. So one question I would have is, I'm assuming that we will mirror how an emergency room would operate. So therefore, what I'm getting at is, in healthcare, really difficult thing to do is, administratively, is to establish minimum staffing requirements. Because what that does is it takes away all flexibility of management to deal with situations such as, gee, I've got 2 people called in, we have this minimum 6 staffing requirement. It's like, it's dead today. I don't need it. I know I don't need it, but I have to do it. That takes away all basic financial control of the situation. Calls for management judgment, but I think, it still provides the system with the flexibility that it needs to manage as best as it can, because, I think certainly it is accepted and expected what our response time is, and, we're very fortunate in Foxborough and want to maintain that, but I think realistically, we can with proper management, you should be able to maintain that, given that knowledge that there are these typical fluctuations, like everyone is going to have the chest pain Monday, and everyone's not on Wednesday, things like that. So I would personally tend to shy away from establishing a policy for a minimum staffing requirement because of that reason.
Very good question. Wow, that was really low. Absolutely, if we were just doing EMS, wholeheartedly agree with you. And I started looking at some of the statistical facts that we had in run cards, because you got to remember, we're 2-dimensional. On one side of the coin, we're EMS. The other side of the coin, we're fire protection and firefighters. And so I started trying to see if there was a trend. And again, this is just rough. It's not even finite. I still need to tweak it some more, because I think that the graphs could have come out a little bit differently. But there is no physical trend that shows fire and EMS being at the same time. They're always off and the opposite of each other. And so that's why when I look at it as a manager, as a chief, it's too much moving targets for it to be one-dimensional where I can find my low or my high. Because when EMS might be low, fire might be high, or vice versa. And that's what I was trying to see if there was a trend when putting the numbers down and looking at the different components of what we do and perform. I couldn't really find that. Some people go as even deeper than that in going by hours on the day. And as Kevin said, it's a crapshoot. And it's not one that I'm willing to take, and I'm hoping that we all realize we have to be good managers. I clearly respect that.
It can be a scientific crapshoot.
Right, and that's why I did this. And I'm still looking at different models, but I think right now, even with this one that I did it's very generic, it's very brief, it's not showing any trend. And that's the thing that I guess we all have to look at. We're two-dimensional, fire and EMS. And so we have two different moving targets. And that's one of the things that I see.
Rod, did you have another copy of that?
I was playing around with that. That was something I wasn't even planning on using, but I had it for one of our meetings, and I didn't even, but it goes right with what Lorraine's asking.
Let me give you another thought. I happen to believe that you can track calls and you can establish staffing patterns on the basis of when your calls occur, and have done that in 2 communities. It takes a tremendous amount of work. Typically, it's something that has to be computerized because you have to take all your calls and you have to sort them by types of calls. And what you're looking for is you have a certain number of calls that need a certain response time and then a number of other calls that need a wholly different response time. So what you're trying to do is segregate your calls by the kind of response time they need, and then ask the question, what do we see for pattern?
Right.
And I've done that, and frankly, have used that to then short shift, say, here's our minimum staff goal, but here are times when we are going to deliberately go below that goal, because we see a call pattern which deviates from the goal. And then I've actually short-shifted, given the chief direction, and said short shift during these times, and we've done it. Now, I will tell you, it is tremendously controversial because, again, you can hit it right 99.9% of the time, and then that one time that the event happens when you've short-shifted and you can't get that response time for that event, all hell will break loose.
Do you have the ability to call people in at that time? Do you have the ability to call people in
At a delay.
But not to achieve that response time. Nobody has come up with a good system yet. Again, the seminal event that you plan for is not the fire, it's not the broken leg, it's not even the arterial bleeder, not these days, because most people have got enough education in order to tourniquet that off. It's the heart attack, when you got to put electricity on that event, and if you don't get it within a certain time, you have brain death. So that's the event. That's the penultimate response time event that we plan for in EMS, the American Heart Standard, which is that 3 to 4 minute response time. What nobody's come up with a good answer to yet is we realize that 3 to 4 minute response time is only going to be needed a very few number of times during the year, but we don't know when. And so we, frankly, hugely overspent to ascribe to that standard, because no one wants to take the responsibility of saying, I'll take the responsibility to direct the shift to go down to 5 or to 4 for the month of August, and then during the month of August, you get that second call. The first one we can handle, the second one we can't.
And I can actually,
That's the dilemma.
Well,
You're
clear.
quite right. You can do a study and you can make educated guesses on when you can do lesser staffing, but I want to be absolutely honest with you, and I want to tell you, I've done it, absolutely done it, and it's worked. But then I've had events happen where that second call occurred, the response time couldn't be met, and boy, oh boy, because the folks that you say, like this chief, we're telling you, chief, to short shift the month of August. And she says, okay. Well, that second event occurs, and he's going to be right here telling you. And worse than that, you're going to have people and firefighters, EMTs, who are going to say, that was a mistake. Here is a dead person. Here is not a statistic. Here is a resident of the community or a visitor to it who is now dead because we made a money-based decision. And that's what makes it so controversial.
When did we switch from 5 to 6? What year?
That was before my time.
Not while I was been here.
87?
But by the way, Lorraine,
I mean,
one
sorry, 87,
fascinating thing.
2007, 2007, it was after Page's place.
One fascinating aspect
Where'd I
to
come
this
up with
is
87?
we already make a decision. Because if we get 3 calls requiring that response time, we can't do it.
Right.
So we've already made a decision, which is we're going to staff at 6. And the decision we've made is we can hit response time for 2, but not a third call.
Right.
But we've greatly reduced the likelihood that that third event will happen. Does it happen? Don't know off the top of my head, but I will bet you, statistically, it's happened, because it will.
And there's only one other thing. Kevin gave you all the aspects of EMS. I can give you the same exact aspects in fire in regards to it only takes 3 minutes for a normal room to get totally engulfed. So there's plenty of facts and statistics on both sides, and that's why it's very, very difficult.
Well, it's been a very trying year for some of your personnel, and been decorated for it. And you speak of a heart attack at the 99 restaurant. We had the young ladies in here for, I guess you'd call it a ceremony, and you had a pinning at the fire station. We all attended because of that. There was a child that was very badly injured, a baby that 2 of your personnel saved with the help of the Foxborough Police Department. We're very lucky to have the people we have. There's no doubt about it. And I, myself, will let AdCom do their work. Let them discuss it and come back to us. I think, you definitely need the minimum staffing that we have now. I've always been a fan to increase it by 1. But obviously, it's been a tough fiscal times in the last few years. But they're getting better, I think. And I just think not only you look at the numbers, you look at the personnel that you have, and they're a dedicated group. So I'm really happy with the way things are, the way they are right now. I think it's working out for the community is best, because it's not just a heart attack. It can be a busy day, would be a busy weekend. You get a soccer tournament in town with the kids down there. There's always an injury, and there could be something happen to somebody on the other side of town. But you got to keep the 2.
Ginny?
How many call firefighters do we have, and at what point do you call in a call firefighter?
Right now, we only have 3. And again, the staffing that we have on our call firefighting, those numbers have reduced. And as those numbers reduce, the monies that we've put aside for those have also reduced. It's a very costly experience to not just train them, insure them, but it's also to get the gear for them and to give them the appropriate training. And it's hard for me as a chief to, where we don't have enough money to invest in the training of the full-timers, to go and start using all of the money to train call firefighters. And so we've looked at both aspects, and until things get somewhat corrected in the whole picture, it's difficult to go any more than what we already have. And so, it's also retention. You go to Plainville, and Plainville is, most of their fire department is based off of call firefighters, and Chief Joubert will tell you he has a very, very difficult time holding them, because as fast as he spends all of their monies training them, they're then leaving and going to a full-time fire department somewhere. So it's got gives and takes. It's a double-edged sword, and right now we don't have the funding to even support that type of program.
Another comment on that. You'd have to, there are collective bargaining contract implications, because right now, full-time personnel, according to the CBA, have preference on overtime. So you'd have to negotiate provisions in so you could effectively use call personnel in order to save overtime. That would be a very, very difficult negotiation, as I'm sure you can appreciate. Is it impossible? No, but it's tough. In towns that have strong call departments, they tend to be rural, where the community is very, very limited budget-wise, and tends to be communities that accept a lengthened response time. Now, fascinatingly enough, there's a famous study in upstate New York comparing mortality rates of the people who live there to mortality rates down by New York City with its full-time career fire departments. And in upstate New York, it tends to be call departments with no full-time career personnel. And the mortality rates in upstate New York were better. Now, was that because they ate less red meat? I don't know. In upstate New York? I don't know, because there's a lot of factors that go into an analysis. Was it just because no, logic says it isn't because you have slower response times. That defies common sense. So there are other things happening. What it directs people to do is to then start looking a lot deeper to determine, could call firefighters work? The short answer is, I've been in communities where we've had very robust call departments and career firefighters. And the Ashburnham, we have 40, 50, 60 call firefighters, and I think only 7 or 8 career full-time firefighters. Overtime is very minimal because those call firefighters pick up the slack. There's a culture there that says, okay, this is good, this works, we're okay. Everybody cooperates, the career guys cooperate, career men and women cooperate well with the call men and women. There's great tolerance and cross-fertilization and education and whatnot and experience. So it works. But you come out to eastern Massachusetts with towns like we are, with large, predominantly career firefighter EMT departments, and you say, hey folks, good news. We're going to create a 50-person call department so that we can curtail overtime. You can imagine the response you're going to get. And it just doesn't work because you can't force people to be cooperative. And the way people look at it is they say, hey, you're taking money out of my pocket that I make right now?
All right, we're going a little bit too far.
Well, I just want to illustrate the difficulty.
Try to wrap it up
By
a
the way,
little bit, Kevin.
That's item 13 in the report.
All right. Anyone else from the board? I'm not trying to be short, but this
No.
just keeps going and going. Sorry.
Sorry,
Linda.
I won't keep going and going. I looked over everything in the packet today, and it was real informative. I think that you guys have done your job answering Dick Heidecker's question, because that's how this all stemmed. Am I correct? Yes. So, I think what it comes down to is you just probably on the budget item itself need some more direction. Maybe that falls from AdCom or whatever, but I'm certainly not going to recommend that we shortcut anything or change personnel or anything else, because we have a relocated fire department that is down that end of the town, which I feel safe because I'm very, very close. But that 30 seconds from just where you used to be to East Foxborough, that could do it. So I want to make sure that we're covered, and I want to make sure that we're covered all the time. I don't care if it's, the quiet time is mostly Wednesday night at, 4 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock in the morning. I don't care. And I'm sorry that the guys have nothing to do, but you know what? When that goes off and that phone rings, they are right on it. So there's not wiping sleep out of their eyes or anything. They are ready to go. And I'm proud of them, and I'm proud to as Mark said, we could go on and say how many lives they've touched, and that they know the people when they're walking in there. We don't have some outsider coming into your home. These guys, have seen them on a daily basis, So I'm not ready to change anything. The only thing I think that needs to change is the way that we present the budget itself to add comment to town meeting. That's what I think it comes down to, but
Great. Well said.
that's all I have to say.
A couple just quick questions on the report and then a couple comments. What happened in 2011 when 2009, we sent 151 medical trips to surrounding towns. 2010, we had 126 sent out, and then 2011, we only had 3.
Yeah, I don't know if it was, I really don't know the answer. Again, it's in the report. It comes out of the IMC reporting that Captain Buckley pulled out for me. It could have easily gone in the wrong box. I know in 2011, we finally had a backup ambulance that wasn't breaking down. I don't think that has any factor, but that has a little bit of factor. But the only thing I can think of is that, the boxes got checked off wrong, but I'd have to check with Captain Buckley to be exactly
Okay,
sure.
thanks. And overall, I concur with what Linda had said. I agree. It was a great amount of effort that went into the data, and it helped me. I mean, this has been kicking around for a while, and this is the second time you've come back because we've asked you questions and you've answered them all. What I take out of this, I look at Foxborough, which has a population of 17,000, compare it to, and we have 7 per shift with a minimum of 6. Sharon, with a population of 17,000, has 1 less firefighter, but $100,000 more in overtime. So you start to see, to kind of put it in perspective. Mansfield, who has a bigger population of 23,000, has 8 firefighters and 7, so they're 1 up on both regular staffed in the minimum. Westfield has almost identical. They have 7 and 6. Norton, 20,000, have 7 and 6. So the data shows that we're average. We're not above or below. Changing from 7 to 8 to get rid of the overtime, I don't see it happening from the data that we've seen, and go from a minimum of 6 to 5, even if it's, you try to guess the season or the weekend versus midday. I'm not going to pretend I know your job, and if you're comfortable with that, it seems like all the other towns comparable to us are that. What I am curious as to the recommendations that we had, the 13 recommendations. I think we can cut off 1 or 2 of them at the bat of changing those numbers. And Mickey Mouse around with the overall. But as far as the management of educating the public, overtime training, unplanned overtime, the other numbers, I think we certainly have some room to explore that and make it a little bit better, whether it's 10 or 20,000, a savings. I think we owe it to at least go through the exercise and see if we can make it better. This recommendation was given to us several months ago, and I think you're right. I think we have answered the big questions of, are we in the right track? But do we want to tweak it more by working with, some of this is labor and HR in those areas that we haven't touched on?
I agree with everybody. I think we've answered everybody's questions, our own questions.
But isn't that what it comes down to, is the budget itself, basically? And, I mean, that's kind of Randy's hat to do, right? Is that what you...
Well, if you look at some of the, some of this is recommendations for, it could be policy or recommendations to basically say, Chief, can you look at making it better by implementing some of these things? You've only been here a couple of years. A lot of this stuff you've inherited from past
Right.
chiefs.
That's what you're saying.
Some of this stuff I think has merit to look in, to get into the process.
And I'll jump in on that. I think that the policy aspect, we've already been making moves on. So that's not a question. The negotiation component is the wild card. I think that, if you focus all your energy on negotiations on the fire, you better be looking across the board, because one thing we have done is been pretty consistent with all the union negotiations here. So it's going to have impact not just on the fire, but maybe on other union contracts. That's something that you leave the town manager and legal counsel to make that determination at the, request of you folks as the Board of Selectmen. I can administer nearly everything that Kevin has asked us to do in regards to come up with the appropriate budgets. The only thing that I'm going to say is that it's all well and good, but you have to put money in those budgets. And we've come out, all of this analysis has showed 4 major areas that we're not budgeting for, that I've brought up to Kevin, brought up to Randy. We all in agreement. We think the numbers speak for themselves. It's just now we have to sit down with AdCom with the budgeting process and budget it the right way. Because right now, as you can see, all the analysis shows that we're $86,000 off from what we've been doing for the last 3 years. And so if I would be happy to have no longer take money from Peter to pay Paul, because that means we're doing what we're supposed to be doing in operating and managing the fire department. And right now, we've been taking a lot of monies out of different aspects, so it does leave some things short so that we can make sure that we're always in the black. And so absolutely, budgeting is not a problem. Policy making is not a problem. Negotiations, I leave that to Kevin and Leo to discuss that with you folks.
Okay. And some of the reasons I'm asking this, because we've got the same exercise to do with the police overtime.
Exactly.
So things like the use of comp time should be terminated immediately. I don't know if that's an issue or if it's a suggestion. I'm not pulling them up, but things like that, I just don't have the knowledge. But I think it's worth asking the question, not at this meeting, but for Kevin to work with them and go through all these things. Bereavement leave, you know.
Some of the things, like you said, those two right off the bat needs to just go away.
Go away,
Because I heard Mark say it, I said it, I don't know. It sounds like you were saying it, but how do you folks feel about that? The two top ones about the, going down in this.
I mean, maybe
stuff. I don't know.
the overtime and the staffing, I think it's working, and if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Right, that's how I feel. But the other things, I think we should try to, take it a step at a time and implement a couple of the things, and I think that the chief is willing to do it, and I think that's what the AdCom is kind of trying to say too, is, let's get it right from the get-go.
Yeah. And I think part of the problem is when you hear overtime budget of almost $500,000, people panic and say you're either mismanaging it or we're doing something wrong, where something like snow and ice removal, when there's an overtime, when the budget is in arrears, there's a reason for that, and it's kind of working with.
It's more visible.
Well, it's more visible, but you can get reimbursement different from
Exactly.
state
Right.
than you can through this.
Yeah.
But if it's the same thing over and over, categorize it differently, but put it in the budget and recognize it, so it's not a big, taboo
Surprise.
term. And I
Yeah.
think that, I don't hear any problems or any complaints about the fire department responding in the service, and all that is positive.
No.
But when budget comes up, it's the overtime number. And if
Yeah.
we can address that, and now we have a better
Sticks out.
understanding through the
Yeah.
work of Kevin and Randy and the intern, and hopefully we can do the same thing with the police department.
Yep.
So, in the list of recommendations, then, all of these items are things that would be implemented? Is that what you're saying?
All the
You know,
things
there are
that
things like-
say should be done, like
should.
sick leave abuse,
Right?
the loss control
Use of
program and
use of
IOD,
administrative
all that's
leave.
going on. The only thing I haven't given you yet, which I was waiting for this meeting tonight, is the overtime report. We promised you a monthly report. We're going to set that up now, spreadsheet format, budgeted amounts. Roger's it's a little bit of a negotiation between he and I and Randy about how much will be set up in some of those accounts that are controllable, like training and department meetings. And then we'll track actuals against it. And you'll see as we go through the year, I think within a couple of weeks, we should be able to give you the July, August report. And then we're going to start following it. What you'll be able to see for the first time is as we get into the year, where are we incurring overtime, for what reasons, and are we heading into trouble?
Right.
And that's not something we've been able to do for you before, but now we'll be able to do it.
The only thing is that the budget we're under FY13 wasn't set up that way. The FY14 budget will be absolutely set up that way. So we'll end up working together like we've done in the past when we've made budget changes, using the existing system and just trying to institute it into the format that we've done. Randy and I have done it multiple times since I've been here, and it's been successful. It's just that we make the system work between the two of them.
It's a little bit artificial backing into it because we've got a budget that we know on average is not adequate. It's 80-odd thousand short. So when we start dropping money into all those different buckets, all the different lines, we know we're going to drop not enough in some buckets. So that's why it's artificial, as opposed to when Raj comes in with his budget this fall, he's going to say, I want that much for training meetings, and I want this much, and we're going to talk, and those will be the subject of discussion. But when they're established, they're not flexible. That's the number. Over here, you're going to have budgets for shift replacement due to sick leave and things like that. And those are budgets where we're going to put in a target, but if we get more sick leave than we predict, there's going to be more. But what we'll be able to tell you is, here's how much sick leave on average we've incurred the last 3 years, here's how much we therefore budgeted, and we had more or less. We'll be able to tell you why it's happening. And that's going to be pretty helpful to you, I think.
Can I ask one more
Okay.
question?
Sure.
Just the difference between the overtime training budget and the overtime public education plan?
One's a grant, one's not.
Okay, thanks.
Chief, thank you very much for your time,
Thanks,
putting
Chief.
all this together for us.
I want to also thank all of you for the kind words you said about the men and women of Foxborough. They are very special people, and I'm happy to have them.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and we are still, believe it or not, 15 minutes ahead of schedule. We can either,
We'll go to your Linda's report.
Lynn, did you have anyone coming on to talk about the craft organization
No.
meeting? So-
I asked town council to come in at 8:30 because he was coming in
He
at
just
9
Just saw him
anyway.
walk in. Yep.
Oh, you did?
Okay.
Okay. So I asked him to come in, give me a minute, I'll go find
Sure,
him.
all right.
Outside that door.
So what this item is, for the people at home, back at the beginning of August, there was a series of meeting with Water and Sewer in the craft group to talk about potentially moving forward. And in summary, they're looking to expand, and we're looking to address the sewer issue. So they had published a list a year or two ago on things that would benefit them, and they were looking for some town support. This list went to the Water and Sewer, and the Water and Sewer group said it's really out of their jurisdiction. Some of the stuff is on the Selectmen's table. It came to us, and we said we'd look at it, but some of the stuff's out of our jurisdiction. It's in the planning board, because it dealt with zoning and articles that Selectmen don't have authority. So went to the planning board, and they said, well, it's really into the Selectmen. So this kind of did a circle for a year or so. So we thought it would be wise to put a group together that had representation from the planning board, the Water and Sewer, from the Selectmen, and one citizen at large, David Brown, who has experience in zoning and the liquor licenses. So they met for a number of meetings since the beginning of August, I think was the first meeting, August 7th. And they were all open meetings. They had public viewing, and they went back and forth for a month. And at the last meeting, they said they've really taken it as far as they could go. And then the way that was set up was they were going to come back to each individual board. So Kevin Weinfeld was going to go back to planning, Bill Early was going to go back to Water and Sewer, and Linda was going to come back to the Selectmen and kind of report back on either the success or the not success, or kind of summarize where we are, and maybe the Selectmen can go in a direction based on those meetings. So while Kevin's getting town council, maybe you wanted to give us an update of.
Sure. So, we met several times, Kevin Weinfeld, Bill Early, myself, and Dave Brown. And all the meetings were open, and I think that it was a starting point for healing between the town and the craft organization, and it was good to just have these things out in the open of how discussions get started, what their wish list, let's say, is, and what they expect from us, and what we would get in turn. And so I know that there's a copy of everything that was released in our packet this week, but mostly, hi Dick.
Hey, come right up to the table.
Lorraine has come to the meetings, you came to the meetings, Ginny came to the meeting. I just didn't see your face, Mark, so
I was letting you do your
that's okay.
committee.
Thank you so much. So,
Called and asked if you need my support.
I know.
I said,
And I
"You know what, I'm gonna
appreciate
let
it.
you do it's your committee, I'll let you do it, you can report back to me.
Right, so, they came to the table. It was mostly Dan Murphy, Ted Fire, and, Dan Krantz. And, you know, you saw the term sheet, what they're looking for. They're looking for some more liquor licenses. They're looking for some zoning changes for residential area. But it wasn't real specific, so we asked them to get a little bit more specific on what they were really thinking of. It came out that they would like to have a Mexican restaurant, a Japanese restaurant, perhaps a bowling alley with an entertainment license there, and some residential, like 300 units they were talking about. They also spoke about wind turbines, things like that. So it was very positive. They're looking for liquor licenses, and I think that that's kind of our section, whereas the residential units and things are sort of planning, and then you get into the billboard signage and the money from that, as well as the $300,000 a year that would go toward our regionalization with Mansfield and Norton. So there's a lot on that plate. So it only stands to reason that, okay, we've gone as far as we could as just discussing things, but what we have to do is come back to our boards to see, you know, what the feeling is towards some of the articles or potential articles that would be coming our way. I also, as I had said before, is this was a discussion group and it was very open. However, just to educate the public that when it comes down to negotiations, those do need to be done by a certain group with them to, you know, so you don't see my cards, I don't see your cards, things like that. So I think as much that could be done in the public has been done, and I think now we kind of shift off to a negotiation team, I guess, that would, you know, speak for the boards once the boards decide how they're feeling on things. So all in all, I think it was a great exercise because the public was involved. I think that there were good feelings on both of the sides, so we'll see where it goes. I'm kind of excited to see that they've obviously built to their potential from Patriots Place, and now it's another round of what else is coming at us. So that's my sort of report.
Excellent. Thank you, Linda. I appreciate that. And thanks for taking it for the team. I know those meetings, a little bit of anxiety.
Well, there was a Friday night, you know.
Friday
I mean, it
nights,
started
and
off
was
on
tough.
Friday nights, and that quickly stopped. So then we went to Wednesday night, so.
That was good. Why don't we go around the table? It might be better. Ginny, do you have any thoughts or comments?
Well, I only attended 2 of those meetings, but what was bothersome to me was, is that me?
I don't know.
What was bothersome to me about the negotiations going forward is that the negotiations in the past had not been fully addressed, in my estimation. Patriot Place, through legislation, was given 12 liquor licenses, and when I was up at the State House, I was involved in the preliminary for that. And one thing that was stressed when we met with Senator Morrissey was that for these additional liquor licenses, the town really should make sure they get all the mitigation that they deserve, because the liquor licenses are very, very lucrative for the holder of that liquor license. And from what I can see in things I've read, I don't think we've gotten the full mitigation from the original 12 liquor licenses. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not interested in looking to the future and making negotiations for the future until the past negotiations have been dealt with. So that's where I stand.
Okay. Lorraine?
You know, I think it was good, the meetings were good in that they did get us a little bit more detail of, you know, what the craft group is trying to accomplish here. And I think, you know, all of us probably have our own opinions on each of those individual items, you know, whether it's a planning issue or regarding a train station in Foxborough. But, you know, at those meetings, I did also voice the opinion that the town, when they voted to support legislation for the 12 liquor licenses in 2007, they were presented with a value of mitigation that certainly has not been realized. And it goes back to the $7.5 million plus or minus $3 million, or plus $3 million if you wanted to consider that, that had been promised for wastewater treatment expansion and infrastructure at the time. So, you know, I feel that that's still outstanding there, and that's tied to the first 12 licenses. Certainly, I'm willing to discuss additional licenses, but I think it's important that that be addressed first. I think the next set of licenses that are being requested should be a totally different set of mitigation. What's being proposed through this MOU, I feel, is a carryover from the 2007 MOU, so I feel like I need to draw a line there and suggest that that should be settled to address the first set of licenses, and any negotiation that the Board of Selectmen or a representative would enter into would be to be focusing on that next set after we've addressed that first set. And I think the other thing, again, outstanding, the billboard issue is just huge in this whole thing, and recognizing that that is a water and sewer issue. You know, we worked for 2 years with water and sewer, supporting them as they were trying to address that initial mitigation also. And I think that that needs to be addressed as, again, as part of, before we would even consider going forward with new liquor licenses. The MOU clearly states the rights and ownership of those signs would come over to the town at the end of 2000, or in May of 2012. That has not happened, so I think that has to be addressed. And you know, I think once that those aspects are addressed, then we could consider going forward.
Okay.
And, I'm sorry, one other thing. Just the way it's presented here in the term sheet and in the memorandum of understanding about the billboards, again, we had been advised by prior council that this was not an acceptable approach. So proposing it this way, I just want to make it clear that we had already been advised that this was not something that would be acceptable in terms of 30B and what the IG had opined on.
Okay, thanks, Lorraine.
Thank you.
Mark?
I think what everybody wants to remember here is what the townspeople perception. Whether you have a contract or you didn't have a contract, the perception of the town was to a higher expectation to what it would receive for those 12 liquor licenses. I couldn't concur anymore. But now, we're supposed to have moved on past that. We as a Board of Selectmen and the townspeople didn't have a lot of control over that. That was a water sewer issue that was done on the backside that we had no control of. That was a separate situation of water and sewer. As their own elected board had the right to do. It didn't work out in the end. I think to move forward, we need to not forget the past, but move forward more cautiously, and to make sure that we can represent the town better than the people did prior, including myself, because I was on those committees. And I was very new selectman at the time. I've learned a lot of things here in the last 5 years or so, and I think a lot of things I would never do again would be done definitely because of the education I've got doing this. But it is the perception of the people of the town of Foxborough that there've been some shortfalls. So I think if we don't represent this, the entire boards, water and sewer, the Board of Selectmen, planning, to the townspeople at town meeting, in a positive fashion, it's a very positive thing for the community, for everything that we're going to give and receive. It'll just be a wasted exercise and a waste of everybody's time. So we need to make sure that when we do this, it's very much, all right, you want this, you want that, that's fine. This is what the town wants in return. Okay. And then we go into executive session, which is all right at that point in time, to discuss it. But you need to put it out there exactly what the terms are, that the conditions is you want and they want. With any entity, not just the craft group, any entity. Because other than that, it'll be such a negative situation like we've seen with the water and sewer deals at town meeting, where it was citizens very outspoken against it, that it'll feel. And the exercise would be just an exercise then. I don't feel like going through another exercise. If we're going to do this, let's keep it out in the open and get it done and let people speak about what they want for the town. That's what I'd like to see happen.
I mean, the two items that I think first and foremost is sewer and liquor licenses, and the other stuff, the zoning and the other stuff that's on the list, are kind of secondary to those two topics. In the first meeting I had with Linda and Dan Murphy, I was pretty upfront saying, and Mark says it's perception, and I think it is more of the social contract than it is from the written contract, but there was a perception that if the liquor licenses were granted through the act of legislation, because we were asking for more than our population was allowed by state rules, we would address the sewer issue. Now, it's easy to play armchair quarterback and see who didn't do what, or which board, or which voter stood up, or what have you, but we're in a precarious situation now. The town needs sewer. The town, and it's been vetted through the master plan and the planning board and the water and sewer. We need to get sewer just as we need good drinking water. If downtown wants to survive, or if a business wants to come in where there's a moratorium and we can, we've talked it to death, at the end of the day, we need sewer. Would it be nice for the craft organization to say, well, we need liquor licenses and we'll go back and pay what the perception was and then we'll move on? It would be certainly easier. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't want to cut my nose to spite my face and saying, well, pay the check or we're not going to move forward, because they may not move forward. They certainly need liquor licenses, I think, for them to grow and expand. They make a profit, and as a result, the town is better off in some aspects between the meals tax and the property tax and what have you. So you can play the numbers. It probably is a benefit for us to both move forward. Right now, the water and sewer is working very hard on a separate tract that I think Kevin and Randy and the attorneys are working on to get to special town meeting and vote for sewer, with a caveat: it's not going to cost somebody that doesn't want sewer any money. It's not going to cost businesses that don't need to tie in any money, because they don't have to tie in, and they're getting creative and going to businesses that have sewer to sell and spreadsheets in an effort. But in special town meeting, hopefully we can get there without this having to work. My hope is at the 11th hour, they both kind of diverge, and we have something that we can put together from these negotiations to make it easier for the town to get sewer. I don't know where it's all going to go, but there's a lot of work to do in a short period of time, and Water and Sewer is working very hard on it. I agree with Linda that more discussion has to happen. Eventually, it's got to get into negotiation and under executive session, because there's a lot of stuff that goes back and forth. I agree with Mark, because at the end of the day, and Ginny, you know it very well, the selectmen could say yes to all of this. In order for the sewer, in order for the liquor licenses to work, the town has to vote on it, because we've got to get special legislation from the state, because we're not owed any liquor licenses because of our population. We have to ask the state for it, and the town has to vote on it. So we could have the best plan, and all it takes is one town meeting for them to say, what part of we weren't paid the money from the last liquor licenses, don't you understand, and it's all for nothing. So do I want to go into negotiations? I think I do. Do I want what I think was owed from the last go-around? I think I do. But to get to that point, I think we need to negotiate, and hopefully they're not going to get all they want with the liquor licenses, probably, in all the zoning requirements and special consideration they're asking for, because, you know, the planning board, the water and sewer, the selectmen, we all have to take a bite out of our, you know, respective purviews. But some, you know, maybe it's a little bit in the middle, maybe it's a little bit, one or the other is on top a little bit, but I think we have to go in that direction. If not, Patriots Place stays as it is because they can't expand. We stay where we are without sewer, and we both look at each other a year from now and saying, well, we should have, could have done something, but we didn't. Hopefully we can be successful, and hopefully all the boards, and I think, you know, going to those meetings and listening to representatives from the planning board and water and sewer saying, you know, Jay Barrows worked his tail off to get the intermunicipal agreement so we can do the sewer, and we're all stuck. So to let more time go by and saying, you know, nobody wants to step forward to unstuck it, it's not going to do anybody any good. So, you know, the concerns that Ginny and Lorraine have, I think hopefully they come out in negotiations and people step up and do what I think the population thinks that they owed, or it's not going to get past town meeting. Hopefully we can make some concessions on the liquor licenses. You know, what I had asked is maybe the next meeting the Patriots come and give us a presentation of what the heck they want to do up there. Because when you say 8 liquor licenses, people panic. But when you say a nice Italian restaurant and an expansion to the hotel that needs a liquor license, or a Chinese or a Japanese restaurant, it's a little more palatable. So if they can educate us, I mean, they did a nice job at the committee meeting. There's still going to be questions, but I think everyone would have a better sense, the board can have a better sense before we say we want to negotiate or not. And then after that meeting, we can release Dick Ellerman, our town council, and whatever group we put together to go forward. But to say, yes, we want to negotiate without knowing what it is going to do harm to the people that really think the money is owed. And, you know, if we wait another 2 weeks and get a presentation and then be a little more informed of what we want to do, I think that goes a long way. Sure.
Just my findings anyways. I'm going to stay positive because I think it's important to stay positive, and folks out there need to realize that we do go to town meeting and it comes down to the vote of the people, just as we did back in 2007 when we as a town decided we do not want a treatment plant. We don't want to accept that at all. And we had several years till this year, and we kept saying, hey, we're getting closer to that deadline. Hey, you know, we need to be talking about this, what we're going to do here. And then the deadline came of May 14th, 2012, and we decided we didn't take them up on the water treatment plant. So let's get that right out on the table, just as much as I keep hearing, and I am not defending the crafts, that's not what I'm here for. What I'm here for is what I've been challenged to do, to get everybody at the table going forward, and to mend some fences, and that's what I'm trying to do. So, again, if we continue to go backwards, folks at home, then you know what, I'm doing a disservice, because there's no need for me to have any more discussions. If we're gonna stay, you know, on the 7.5 $5 million. You know, and it was brought up about the $3 million. The $3 million, again, was money that when I looked at that sheet at town meeting, I said, they're going to count this $3 million in there when it's just an idea, because if they go out and they build this plant, it's going to cost them $3 million less than we would as a town building it. So that's really money that, like, I never looked at that anyway. So, you know, now you're down a little bit more than that. Now you're down to, say, you know, $4 million, you know, and whatever it is, it's not coming to us. So if you want to hold that person or, you know, responsible for that much money, and the majority of the board is going to do that, then we're silly to even bring it. So all I'm saying is, we had the opportunity to have a waste treatment plant up there. We decided not to. So call it what it is. Maybe we don't want sewer in this town. Maybe people, you know, have just had it and say, I don't care what it looks like uptown. I don't care if we get any more stores. I don't care if I ever see a laundromat in Foxborough, or car wash, whatever, if that's how they feel. But I don't think that was how it was presented when people gave their thoughts about the grand scheme of things. So it is very important to get sewer. You know, if we can get it any other way, that's what we need to do. But as far as the craft organization and the discussions of going forward and making expanding Patriot Place to bring in more money to the town, maybe we should just talk about that. But if we're going to talk about the past and what we didn't do for 7 years, you know, that's kind of a waste for me.
Sure, go ahead, Jenny.
It was my understanding when Bill Early was sitting before us that they had tried previously to use the craft organization to get the sewage, and it didn't work. So then the water and sewer were going to craft a warrant article just to get the money for our own tie-in with Mansfield, which I believe Dick Ellerman is writing. That's what Mr. Picella said at the last meeting. So to me, the tie-in with Mansfield, if this warrant article passes, that's completely separate. That has absolutely nothing to do with Patriot Place, because we're going to go out and get the financing ourselves.
Okay.
I mean,
Super.
that's
that's what I just said to Kevin. I said, if we can do this some other way, then let's do that.
fine.
But, you know,
But
the town has to want it
the
to.
memorandum states that, you know, whereas we're constrained by sewers, blah, 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 it ties in their memorandum with our sewer problem. And from what I understood, water and sewer, our sewer problem is our sewer problem, and they're going to go about doing a warrant article. Am I wrong on that?
One of the potential sources of revenue to pay for the sewer project could be whatever we're able to negotiate with crafts. It's not the only one we're looking at. What I've been tasked to do is to look at I think I came up with 10 potential ways to finance the sewer project, but certainly one of those possibilities is to use whatever money might be forthcoming from a negotiation with the craft organization. So what Bill earlier has asked for is a series of different iterations, anticipating potentially the craft organization money, but also anticipating that doesn't happen. So we're looking at a lot of variables, but not excluding monies from the craft organization. But if I would, Mr. Chairman, on that topic, to me, it's just happenstance that the negotiations with the craft organization occur at the same time that the town finds itself in the need for sewerage. The cost of the sewer project may or may not have any relevance to the value of the changes that the craft organization are seeking. And I wouldn't necessarily tie them. It would be a fatal flaw if Kevin and I went in there and said, okay, if we go for sewer, give us this money. That's I wouldn't tie it that way. If they do coincide, as the chairman says, that'd be great. But, so, to answer your question, we're looking at a lot of variables, including the craft organization funds, as ways to pay for the sewer project.
But I don't think the sewer project should be held hostage to any possible negotiations with the craft. I mean, I think we have to go ahead
Right.
and do it, because
perhaps,
Mansfield, we
Jenny,
have to tell Mansfield whether we're going to tie in or not.
Yeah, perhaps, Jenny, you misunderstood. We are looking at other ways to finance the sewer project that have nothing to do with the craft organization. Sale of existing flows, pre-sale of potential flow, betterments, special assessments, rates, bonding, all kinds of things. And so it's not, to that extent, it's not held hostage. However, it's obvious if you do get a hit of money every year to help pay for that cost, that'd be great. But we are proceeding with other variables that don't include the craft organization.
Which, I will say, hostage is a little rough of a word, Jenny. I mean, not being, just a little rough. But this has been ongoing for years, Dick, prior to this whole board. First, Foxborough was negotiating with Mansfield Norton to go that way. Then all of a sudden the brakes go on, we're going up to Route 1. Then all of a sudden the brakes go back on that, now we're going back to Mansfield. Now the brakes are starting to go back on that because we can't go back to Mansfield unless we have this going. We need to just move forward going to Mansfield with our own revenue streams, not with any other entities being involved with it. That way that situation stays positive. You can't tie one to the other. If you were here, which you were back in the day, all of a sudden we were going to tie in the Vinco project, because they had to put their own water super treatment plant, and everybody had wanted to hold them to a 1.5 million contribution to go to up to the stadium or Mansfield. And the gentleman point blank said, if the toilets don't flush, I'm out of business. So he has to go forward and build his own treatment plant, which he did. So you can't hold up waiting for somebody to roll the dice. I mean, to give you the answer. The carrot's been dangling back and forth for years now. The situation is, if we want water and sewer, keep everybody out of it, but the town and Mansfield Norton and that whole agreement. We'll figure it ourselves. You can't rely on something that isn't there or could be promised, or just go down that false road again. It's just like a bad business venture with any entity. If somebody promises they're going to do something and you rely on that and it doesn't happen at the end, it doesn't pay the bills. It's an old saying I've had in business my whole life. Promises don't pay the bills. We don't have anything right now. We don't even have a promise. So let's just move forward as a town. Jimmy said it right. It's now become a necessity. We are stopped in Foxborough from expanding in any direction at all unless we go to water sewer. So we're all big boys and girls. We can figure it out ourselves, and we'll go to Mansfield. I'm not going to entertain anything else in my brain to go to another entity and ask for the money, whatever. If the revenue streams come later, then we increase our situation. Right now, we're on our own. Let's just get it done on our own. The other situation where they want to have this and that, that's a whole nother negotiations. That's a whole nother thing. It's got nothing to do with going to Mansfield right now, and that's the way we got to stay focused as a board.
So I think to that end, Water and Sewer Committee, separate board, elected board, they're working independently, and they're going to go for that warrant article. And if we can support them, as is the planning board and in your efforts, that's the paramount path. If this happens at the same time, ahead of it, concurrently, fantastic, but if not, that's the direction that the town. So I think we're all saying the same thing.
Yep.
Now, the question is, I would like to have the craft organization come in here and present to us what their plans are for Route 1. Liquor licenses, zoning, housing, billboards, so we can hear it, and then we either say, geez, that's great, we'll buy into it tomorrow, or we have apprehension, or, go to all the boards and come back to us in a year after you've heard them. I don't know. But we'll put time on the next agenda for half an hour, and let's hear that presentation. Is that okay with the board?
I agree.
Thank you.
All right.
Yep.
And then, I know, Dick, you had talked about, maybe going into negotiations with them. Let's hold off for a couple weeks, and let's hear what the board has to say after hearing that. All right. Kevin, do you want to add anything? I know you've been going back and forth with water and sewer.
I
And the
think
different
all we
boards.
wanted to do, Dick and I, tonight, was hear the board's reaction to the term sheet, and I think what I'm understanding you to say is have them come in a couple of weeks. I made a note of that, make a presentation, tell you what they've got in mind. Meantime, we don't negotiate, and see what you decide you want to do as a board after they give you a little more detail, whether you want to, whatever the board's reaction is, we'll await word.
Sounds good. All right, anything else on this topic? Okay, thank you. We're still 10 minutes early. Since, Dick, you're here, we can open up the discussion. This is a continuation from the North Street. The board had asked for you to come in to enlighten them. I say them because I'm going to recuse myself because I live in that area. So I've recused myself from all the past hearings. So Mark took over, and I guess Mark can explain what the request is.
Thank you. Dick, basically, we had a citizen come forward and tell us that the interpretation of the bylaw, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, by memory here, that the board should set guidelines on it. That was according to the AG's decision. Kevin disagreed with that. I said, you know what, let's have our town council, Dick Edelman, come in and explain the board's role in the bylaw. Do we have anything that we need to adjust according to the AG, or is it just the way it is and it's said and done? So we're relying on your expertise.
So what I'm not talking about is the commercial parking lots that you do currently regulate.
No.
I'm talking about parking of vehicles not for fee in the North Street area. It's sort of the part.
For a fee.
For a fee.
For a fee.
All right. For a fee, you've outlawed that. The bylaw says no one can do that, so you don't need to further regulate that. The bylaw prohibits it, and the police department has all the authority in the world to stop it.
Okay. So the board doesn't have to take any action on making a policy?
No, the bylaw prohibits parking for a fee in the North Street area,
Anywhere in town?
except in the commercial lots that you licensed, yes. Okay.
Now, what about the citizens that want to park?
Yeah, that's
Family, we'll call it.
friends and family. Now, the bylaw also regulates that, and it regulates it by prohibiting it where it's a safety hazard or a hazard to pedestrian traffic or a nuisance. Now, by itself, it's enforceable without further regulation. It's enforceable by the police department as long as they reasonably perceive a threat to public safety, traffic safety, pedestrian safety. They can stop it under the authority of the bylaw, and your board needs not do anything further. You can if you want, and you do have the authority to create regulations pursuant to which the bylaw would be enforced. For example, you could have a regulation that said that during stadium events, you don't want cars spilling onto the street. It's not up to me to suggest what your regulations say.
Right.
But you can adopt regulations in furtherance of that section of the new bylaw, but you don't have to. So the town can enforce the bylaw through its police powers, and the chief and his officers have the existing authority and ability to do that. As an aside, to the extent that parking becomes a violation of zoning, not addressed by the bylaw, but addressed by existing zoning bylaws, that too is enforceable by the zoning enforcement officer. But if you're directing your attention just to the bylaw that was recently approved by the Attorney General, it's enforceable as it exists without the need for further regulation, and it's enforceable as a police power as opposed to a zoning power.
Any questions from the board?
Did you see the letter that we got?
I did.
You did?
Yeah, I saw it, and again, you may, if you wish, have the great honor of adopting regulations, but you do not need to do that. You can if you want to.
Ginny? Any questions? All right. Kevin? Anybody from the public like to ask town council a question? Come to the microphone, please. This is why we're here, Nancy, just for you.
Just for me.
And send you the bill, too.
At least my work was for free, right? But my question has to do with the actual language of the AG's opinion.
Excuse me, Nancy, for the record, please.
Okay. I'm Nancy Kempany from Messenger Avenue. So my question has to do with what your opinion is with respect to that single paragraph that is in the AG's opinion that states that she understands that the town will be passing a policy. I know that Mr. Pecos suggested that she heard that from someone, and I would suggest to you that that means that there was someone who was a town official who made that suggestion to her.
Yeah.
Because I can't see the AG incorporating into her decision hearsay, grapevine, or some statement from a resident. And if the town, in fact, did represent to her that there would be a policy enacted, then it seems to me that it's incumbent on the town to enact some type of policy, at least to clarify that the first paragraph of the bylaw will not be used to enforce a prohibition on parking by residents to the extent that it is not, parking isn't for pay. The second paragraph, I realize, stands on its own.
Okay. I actually did talk to Margaret Hurley about that issue, and it was, she was repeating anecdotal information that she had. It was not a directive to the town to, in fact, further adopt regulation with regard to subsection A. In any event, subsection A says you can't do it for a fee. End of story. It doesn't, I don't know what regulations you could have. It says you can't do it for a fee. But this was not a directive, it was not a directive to the board to adopt regulations with regard to subsection A.
Were you able to find out who it was who represented that to her?
I didn't ask that, no.
Does anybody here know who it was who represented that?
I think, Kevin, you?
Well, what I do know, I don't know who represented it. We do know that it was not the police chief, the building inspector, or the town manager. We know that for a fact.
So
Or
it
the
might
town
have been
council.
former
Or
town
maybe it
council.
was the town
Or
council.
me.
Someone else, I don't know.
Not the current town council.
But, you know, Nancy, I basically had him come in here to answer that one question where you said that you asked the board if the board should adopt guidelines.
Well, I said a policy because that's what
Policy
she
and
said.
guidelines is what I remember hearing. And I think you've got your answer.
Well, I think that while he may be saying that she's not saying that you must do it, that it's still something that could be done. And I'm not saying that what you're, my suggestion, as you can see from the letter, wasn't that you say that you're not going to enforce paragraph A. That wasn't my intention. But I think that it's possible and that it would be a good thing for the selectmen to issue a policy that echoes what was in that paragraph. Because what we were talking about here was the manner of enforcement of paragraph A. And when we all went to town meeting, we saw that the police chief stand up and suggest that he felt that parking more than the number of cars that you have registered to you at your address should be deemed a violation of that bylaw. And I don't think that that's what people voted on at town meeting, and I think that it could be the role of the selectmen to clarify that.
I think we did clarify that The building inspector was here and said he knows who's doing it and who's not doing it. He's been dealing with this for years, and he knows who has people and friends over, and you have to leave it to their discretion at a point in time. We can't micromanage all our departments. And you asked me a question, the board, I should say. We gave you your answer. The teeth are there. So you need to stop parking cars if you're collecting money. If you're parking cars, and no matter where you are in town, if you are parking friends and family over, I think we'll understand that. I think that the building inspector knows. I think that the police chief knows. But, like the last concert, the first Patriots game on Thursday night, when the building inspector went down, had 11 people waving people in, park here for money. And that's not the only person that saw it, because some board members were also driving around that night, and
But Mark, that was before the bylaw went into effect.
No, the bylaw went into effect prior to that.
It
And
didn't
you know what it comes down to?
Third.
It comes down to, Mr. Gellerman just told you, you can't do it for a fee. Don't do it for a fee. They have to prove that you collected a fee. If you get caught collecting money, that's collecting a fee. Am I wrong, Kevin? All right, so just don't be caught taking money, ladies and gentlemen. That's all I'm going to tell you. So, or you'll get a fine. Anybody else from the board? Anybody else? Okay. Seeing that, the board will take a 5-minute recess and come back for executive session solely to discuss union negotiation, review of executive session minutes, and then go back to adjourn. Roll call to go in executive session. Linda?
Yes.
Jenny? Lorraine?
Did you have the reason for going in stated? Mark?
Yes, non-union negotiation, review of executive session minutes.
Thank you.
And Mark Sullivan, yes. James is here, he'd say yes too. Yeah. All right, see you in 5. Oh.